Welcome to Introduction to Sociology 2, and today our topic of discussion is Robert Martin's functionalism. Let's begin. Before we go into Robert Martin and his different ramifications of his functional theory, we shall be learning the what are the objectives, what are we trying to learn. We shall be learning here the primary components of Robert Martin's theory of functionalism, the ideas of functions, the different typification of functions, for instance, dysfunctions, for instance, non-functions, his concept of net balance and how we use it in the sociological parlance. We shall also be learning about his idea of anomie and how does Robert Martin propose his middle range theory as a critique against Talcott-Parsons' grand theory. Let's begin. Although Talcott-Parsons is the most important structural functional theorist, his student Robert Martin authored some of the most important statements on structural functionalism in sociology. Martin criticized some of the more extreme and indefensible aspects of structural functionalism. But equally important, his new conceptual insights helped him give structural functionalism a continuing usefulness. Although both Martin and Parsons are associated with structural functionalism, there are important differences between them. For one thing, while Parsons advocated the creation of grand overarching theories, Martin favored more limited middle-range theories. For another, Martin was more favorable towards Marxian theories than Parsons was. And Talcott-Parsons, we have definitely finished our module on Talcott-Parsons. As you go on reading Talcott-Parsons, you will know that Robert Martin, being one of the students of Talcott-Parsons, he had developed a theory of functionalism that is way different from the way his master or his teacher has developed it. And his idea of functionalism is far more local, far more customized, far more regional, and far more accessible than the overarching theories that Talcott-Parsons has, offered. Therefore, we can say that Robert Martin definitely will endue us with a middle range theory as against the grand theory that Talcott-Parsons has proposed and which is often critiqued for being too high-ranging, for being abstract, for being inaccessible, and often not able to capture the real experiences and ground reality. What are the three basic postulates of functionalism that Robert Martin had tried to challenge, and what are those? Martin criticized what he saw as the three basic postulates of functional analysis, as it was developed by anthropologists such as Malinowski and Ratcliffe Brown. The first is a postulate of the functional unity of society. Now, this postulate holds that all standard social and cultural beliefs and practices are functional for society as a whole, as well as for individuals in society. This view implies that the various parts of the social system must show a high level of integration. However, Martin maintained that although it may be true for very small primitive societies, this generalization cannot be extended to larger, more complex societies. So, the first functional or the first postulate was the functional analysis or the functional unity of society. Now, it was always a presumed notion that all parts of the society are functional and every part of the society are actually having positive functions to perform, as if they play a major role in integrating the parts with the whole, and as if their parts or their functions are very much in sync with the whole. And all institutions, all parts of the system which are currently in practice are supposed to be accommodative, are supposed to be integrative, and are supposed to be functional. But Robert Martin had rightly commented that not all units, not all smaller parts are that functional, because there may be some institutions which are there like a vestigial organ, like an appendix. Just because they had been functioning for a long time, they still are. But one can easily question their viability and their plausibility in the society. So it is not to be mentioned, or it is not to be presumed ever, that functionalism produces a very happy-go-lucky society where all the parts are in idyllic or imaginative solidarity with one another or cohesion with one another. There may be, at points of time, certain parts which fall back, which become shoddy, and which become less useful in the current context, which must be detected. Universal functionalism. Universal functionalism is a second postulate. That is, it is argued that all the standardized social and cultural forms and structures have positive functions. Martin argued that this contradicts what we find in the real world. It is clear that not every structure, custom, idea, belief, and so forth has positive functions. For example, rabid nationalism can be highly dysfunctional in the world of proliferating nuclear arms. And this is what Ritzer has also said in his book, Sociological Theory, from which, we have developed this concept. And when universal functionalism says that supposedly the same thing, different kind of beliefs, customs, norms, ideas, normative expectations, especially ideas, beliefs, are functional because they have some certain positive functions to play. But certain ideas may not be that functional today. For instance, jingoism. For instance, rabid nationalism. For instance, any kind of rough or turbulent kind of nationalism, which often questions the accommodative nature of the society. Therefore, we are supposed to be more secular, and that is what our society portrays. But any kind of communal sentiments or fundamentalism is never allowed. And certain ideas which back fundamentalism or nativity is strongly reprimanded. So it shows that certain ideas can be dysfunctional as well. Certain ideas may lose its gravity in the society, and certain ideas may not stand for integration, which functionalism enforces upon us. The postulate of indispensability. Third is the postulate of indispensability. The argument here is that all standardized aspects of society not only have positive functions, but they also represent indispensable parts of the working whole. This postulate leads to the idea that all structures and functions are functionally necessary for society, and no other structures and functions could work quite as well as those that are currently found. Martin's criticism following persons was that we must at least be willing to admit that there are various structural and functional alternatives. So this is very important. And learners, I think you will be able to appreciate the significance of these statements, where we are questioning the indispensability of institutions, of paths, or ideas which we thought were indispensable, were absolutely necessary for the sustenance of the society, as if there are no alternatives which can do the work, but which is absolutely wrong. And there are functional alternatives, there are substitutes for institutions which are coming up, and therefore it is no longer necessity that one institution must remain for a very long time, or at times it may become dysfunctional, giving way to other institutions. And certain other institutions may crop up which haven't been that popular. For instance, we find more of old age homes in our society now, more of creches, more of Montessori's, which we had never seen before, especially children of, say, 2.5 years, 1.5 years, half years. They are going to schools, and such institutions were not there. We had more of higher education. But Montessori education, or this kind of primary education, we rather would be saying toddler education, was not there. But because society changes and no longer education at home is encouraged, we encourage the students to go out, to have their affiliations somewhere. So there are alternatives which we look for. And that women will sit back at home and they will do all the house chores. That is no longer the norm now. The empowered women has shown that the institutions have cropped up everywhere to support the work that they do. That is why we are having modern alternatives like old age homes, we are having delivery food taken from outside, we are having the laundry systems, we are having whatnot. Okay, all the instruments which can actually replace certain work that we had been doing. So functional alternatives is there, and that the alternatives are not there, it might question that why it is not there. Why should we take something as indispensable, especially a part or a system which must be taken as that indispensable, absolutely indispensable, that nothing can take its place. reliance on non-empirical assertions, and Martin's position was that all these functional postulates rely on non-empirical assertions based on abstract theoretical systems. At a minimum, it is the responsibility of the sociologist to examine each empirically. Martin's belief that empirical tests, not theoretical assumptions, are crucial to functional analysis led him to develop his paradigm of functional analysis. Martin made it very clear from the outset that structural functional analysis focuses on groups, organizations, societies, and culture. And these can be subject to structural functional analysis, and they must not be taken as to represent a standardized something, But often, this groups, organizations, societies, they become objective items which are amenable to structural functional analysis, and they often represent a standardized item. He had in mind such things as social roles, institutional patterns, social processes, cultural patterns, etc. So what Martin was trying to say is empirical tests is all that is necessary, and whatever we had been saying so far was baseless because we did not have any empirical examinations or tests for ourselves. So he said it is absolutely necessary to understand that that functional postulates, in order to develop functional postulates, every claim that we make, that must be tested against hardcore facts. Social functions. Early structural functionalists tended to focus almost entirely on the functions of one social structure. However, in Martin's view, early analysis tended to confuse the subjective motives of individuals with the functions or structures or institutions. The focus of the structural functionalist should be on social functions rather than on individual motives. Functions, according to Martin, are defined as those observed consequences which make for the adaptation or adjustment of a given system. However, there is a clear ideological bias when one focuses only on adaptation or adjustment, for there are always positive consequences. It's important to note that social facts can have negative consequences as well. Why we are saying this? Because we wanted to make clear that system can be dysfunctional also at the same time. And there's always an ideological bias. There's always a tendency to confuse between individual motives and the functions of a system. We must understand that individual motives are not the functions of the system, because functional systems or the systems of the function are something which the system do or does to adapt itself to a given situation, to integrate itself bring that integration between the parts. This is very different from the individual motives that we have. So we need to differentiate between the two. There's always a room for dysfunction. Just as structures or institutions could contribute to the maintenance of other parts of the social system, they could also have negative consequences. So certain institutions might be functional. Again, as I said, certain parts may be dysfunctional as well. For instance, slavery can be dysfunctional. Why? Because it brings a lot of hierarchy in the society, a stratification in the society, creation of an underclass, which is always tormented, tortured, and exploited. But this is functional, this is dysfunctional for the people at the receiving end, but this is again functional for those who are the elites, whom the servants actually or the slaves actually serve. So functionality and dysfunctionality are the two sides of the same coin. Non-functions. Martin also posited the idea of non-functions, which he defined as consequences that are simply relevant to the system under consideration, and these are just survivals from the historical times. And certain functions which are no longer relevant now, and we don't quote much about them. They are supposed to be vestigial or something which has lost its significance. Okay, so maybe we might say that a child marriage is no longer that significant because it has died down, but it is not so. In that case, it should not be taken as a non-function, because though constitutionally child marriage is a debarred act, we find in many corners of the society where even under the carpets, these child marriages happen. So we have to look for those institutions, maybe those systems which no longer remain that functional now. So they are often termed as non-functions by Martin. So now we are talking about net balance, and how will you understand whether the system is more functional or dysfunctional? One cannot simply add up positive functions and dysfunctions and objectively determine which outweighs the other, because the issues are so complex and are based on so much subjective judgment that they cannot be calculated and weighed easily. The usefulness of Merton's concept of net balance comes from the way it orients the sociologist to the question of relative significance, or whether it is functional and for which group. As we have rightly said, and that it is difficult sometimes to understand the net balance and how much the system is functional or how much is it dysfunctional. Why? Because certain ideas, certain issues that you are trying to grapple with, the ideas, the customs, for instance, slavery in this situation, it is so dialectical, it is so intersectional, it has so many concepts and elements within itself that it becomes difficult to dissect those into thin layers and to say that this system or this subsystem is more functional than the other. So definitely, here we are talking about the levels of analysis. Maybe we can say that certain sections are more functional than the other. We might say that slavery as a system is more functional, say for the white family, say for the white elites, say for the white political system, say for the totalitarian system, say for the regimented political system. But it was less functional and more of dysfunctional for, say, the black families, the black polity, the underdogs, and for the underclass. So these kind of clarifications come up and these kind of bifurcations are there. Therefore, it is never possible to evaluate the entire thing and to assess the net balance or how much functionality it serves as a consolidated whole, because there are so many thin layers and interstices within that particular whole that we are talking about. Problematizing the functions. To cope with the problems like these, Martin added the idea that there must be levels of functional analysis, because functionalists had generally restricted themselves to the analysis of the society as a whole. But Martin made it very clear that analysis also could be done on an organization, institution, or a group. And returning to the issue of the functions that we have already said that it could be necessary to differentiate them into several levels. And why, we are not here trying to say whether it is functional for the entire society. We are bifurcating the society into much lower units, into much separate units, and to a more simpler units for our benefit of analysis. We are trying to say whether one particular system is functional for a group, for a organization, for a unit, for a village, for a neighborhood, in this way. So more you boil it down into smaller units, the more net balance and this comparison between functionality and the dysfunctionality becomes precise and easier for you to understand and grapple. Next, we are talking about the latent functions and the manifest functions. As we have said that the levels of functional analysis are there. Sometimes it can be more functional, sometimes it can be less functional, sometimes it can be more functional for one particular organization and less functional for another organization. But at the end of the day, what Martin was trying to say was functions definitely have two kinds of typifications primarily. One is manifest functions, another is latent functions. Why was he saying this particularly in this context? Because certain times there might be dysfunctionalities which may not be easier to understand from outside. Because these are so surreal, and these are so hidden. Sometimes which calls for sociological consciousness, sometimes which invites you for a wide range of investigations in order to masquerade, in order to debunk the veil that you put on the society. So this unveiling is necessary. And therefore, many functions go unnoticed, go undetected, go less detected. And we think that, it's absolutely functional. See, slavery is nice because it is serving the purpose of serving one class of people with with all sorts of resources. But what about the underclass? How are they treated? Aren't we talking about latent functions then? Slavery at the end of the day had a latent function of providing more status to the people of the elite class. So it was not just, manifestedly it might be said that slavery system as an economic system of production was good because it was increasing the productivity of one particular economy. But what about the discrimination? What about the stratification? And what about the hiatus that was being created in the society? If economic boosting was only a manifest function of the slavery system, then legitimately ruling the underclass, in the name of slavery and giving a stratification with lots of privilege to one class and misfortune and anxiety and misery to another class was a part of latent function of the slavery. duality in terms of function. A further clarification of functional theory, Merton pointed out that a structure may be dysfunctional for the system as a whole, yet may still exist. One might make a good case that discrimination against blacks, females, and other minority groups is dysfunctional for American society. Yet it continues to exist because it's functional as a part of the social system. For example, discrimination against females is generally functional for males. However, these forms of discrimination are not without some dysfunctions even for the group for which they are functional. Males do suffer from the discrimination against females. Similarly, whites are hurt by their discriminatory behavior towards blacks. So once if we think that this particular system is so dysfunctional that they must be done away with, we must no longer give any attention to them, that is also not right. Because this oppression against the blacks, the minorities, against the unrepresented classes of people might not be functional, but despite that they continue being there because they are functional for the society per se, and they are functional for the white males supposedly. So if you think it's absolutely dysfunctional, no, it may be functional for certain sections of the people. And it is also difficult to say that the white people are not hurt by this oppressive comments that they make. Sometimes they too are hurt. Sometimes they too suffer from the pangs of conscience. So functionality and dysfunctionality are rather twin concepts that go together, creating a duality, though not absolutely getting banished away. Now, we have certain criticisms, the teleology and the tautology. And these are certain criticisms which have been leveled against Robert Merton and his form of functionalism, and let's see what are they. The problem, according to Turner and Mariansky, is the extension of teleology to an unacceptable length. An illegitimate teleology is the one that implies that purpose or end states guide human affairs, which is not the case. For example, it is illegitimate to assume that because society needs procreation and socialization, it will create a family-like institution. A variety of alternative structures could meet these needs. Society does not need to create the family. The structural functionalists must define and document the various ways in which the goals do in fact lead to the creation of the specific substructures. And it is very wrong to imply that purpose or end will state and guide the human affairs, always. It would also be useful to be able to show why other substructures could not meet the same needs. A legitimate teleology would be able to define and demonstrate empirically and theoretically the links between society's goals and the various substructures that exist within the society. An illegitimate teleology would be satisfied with a blind assertion that a link between society and a specific substructure must exist. So how you develop the link between the particular, societal goal and the substructure must be very clearly spelled out. So what is the goal of the society? You're saying the goal of the society is procreation, and therefore you're linking it blindly to the idea of procreation to be done by the institution of family. So that procreation must be done, and connecting it back to the substructure of family doesn't work always. And this might create a condition for illogical teleology. How is it being created? When you are unable to explain the creation of one particular substructure, and you propose it as if it is one of the goals that the society or the system is performing or the system has to attain. This may not be appropriate for the creation of certain subsystems. Tautology. The other major criticism of the logic of structural functionalism is that it is tautological. A tautological argument is one in which the conclusion merely makes explicit what is implicit is a premise or is simply a restatement of the premise. In structural functionalism, the circular reasoning often takes the form of defining the whole in terms of parts and then defining the parts in terms of whole. Thus, it would be argued that the social system is defined by the relationship among its component parts and that the component parts of the system are defined by their place in the larger social system. Because each is defined in terms of the other, neither the social system nor its parts are well defined. This is very important, and this is where sometimes Robert Merton's theory lags, because you are suffering from tautology. When you have a tendency to explain the conclusion in terms of the premise and the premise in terms of the conclusion, so there is nothing new that you are proposing. You're saying the paths exist for the survival of the whole. And then for defining the whole, you are saying the whole exists because paths have to be taken care of. So what is the new thing that you have proposed? Nothing new. The same thing has been repeated as if in a circular order of repetition, where same facts have been churned and repeated without any sort of new things being said. And when you exhaust this, when conclusion and the premise are the same thing that you're repeating one after the other, it is said that the theory suffers from tautology. Last, we'll come to the conclusion. We conclude with one of the best known contributions to structural functionalism, indeed to all of sociology, is analysis of the relationship between culture, structure and anomie. Martin defines culture as that organized set of normative values governing behavior which is common to members of designated society or group, and social structure as that organized set of social relationships in which members of the society or a group are variously implicated. Anomie occurs when there is an acute disjunction between the cultural norms and goals and the socially structured capacity of the members of the group to act in accordance with them. Why does anomie happen? When society has spelled out what is a normative expectation, but how the individuals will go on achieving that goal has not been properly spelled out. This disjunction between the normative expectations and the agencies and the strategies and the tactics through which one can go on achieving that goal, this mismatch creates anomie, which takes the form of deviance and a much more darker form of incoherence in the society. Thus, Martin is looking at social and cultural structures, but he is not focally concerned with the functions of those structures. Rather, consistent with his functional paradigm, he is mainly concerned with the dysfunctions, in this case anomie. More specifically, as we have seen, Martin links anomie with deviance and thereby is arguing that disjunctions between culture and structure have the dysfunctional consequence of leading to deviance within the society. And in this way, Martin talks about deviance, and he has been pinned down and namped down by many theorists who feel that Martin was mainly talking about dysfunctions instead of functions, and how should functions be proposed and designed and defined. That was not told. And therefore, he was talking about anomie, which is actually a kind of a dysfunctional, which creates dysfunctions in the society. And last but not the least, Martin definitely talks of the middle range theory, which is more accurate, which is more closer to you, which is far more accessible, and it is less scary than the large-scale structures, the grand theories that Talcott Persson was proposing. In that sense, Robert Martin was far more spontaneous and far more innovative in his making of functional theory to make it more relevant with the current times. Thank you.